Elena Voss woke up before sunrise, like she did every day on Haven's Reach. She made tea, packed a small lunch, and walked her daughter Mia to school. The colony was small, with only a few thousand people. Most of them were farmers, teachers, and workers. There were no soldiers here. No warships sat in orbit. The colony had signed a peace treaty with the Zarathi Compact many years ago, and since then, life had been calm. The Zarathi were a tall, gray-skinned species, with sharp eyes and a strict sense of order. They ruled a large part of the galaxy through careful rules and treaties. Humans had fought them once, long ago, in a short but bloody war. That war ended with a treaty. Since then, the Zarathi believed humans had learned their lesson. They saw colonies like Haven's Reach as proof. Quiet colonies. No weapons. No fleets. Just families living simple lives. Elena did not talk much about her past. She worked now as a teacher, helping young children learn math and reading. But before that, she had served in the Human Fleet Reserve. She had not been a soldier who fought on the front lines. Instead, she managed supply chains. She knew how to move ships, food, weapons, and fuel across long distances without anyone noticing. It was not a glamorous job. Nobody wrote songs about supply officers. But without people like her, no war could be won. Her husband had died years ago, during a border skirmish, before the treaty was signed. Since then, Elena raised Mia alone. She never spoke of the war to her daughter. She wanted Mia to grow up in peace, not in fear. But peace on Haven's Reach was more fragile than anyone admitted. A new Zarathi commander named Threll Voss had arrived 6 months ago to oversee inspections of the colony. He did not trust humans. He believed the peace was too easy, too convenient. He thought humans were hiding something, waiting for a chance to strike again. His soldiers began visiting the colony more often. At first, the visits were simple. They checked supply records. They asked questions about food shipments. But over time, the visits became longer. The questions became sharper. Zarathi soldiers walked through homes without asking. They opened cabinets. They read private messages. The colony council, led by an older man named Samuel Ortiz, told everyone to stay calm. "We signed a treaty," he said during a town meeting. "If we break it, even by accident, they will use it as an excuse to hurt us. We must be patient." Elena agreed, at least in public. She sat quietly in meetings, nodding along with the others. But she watched the Zarathi soldiers closely. She noticed patterns in their patrols. She noticed how their scanners worked, how their communication signals moved between checkpoints. Old habits from her military days did not disappear easily. One evening, after a long inspection, Commander Threll stood in the town square and spoke to the gathered colonists. "Your colony claims to be peaceful," he said, his voice cold and formal. "But peace, built on hidden intentions, is not peace. It is a trick. We will continue to inspect until we are certain there is nothing left to hide." The colonists said nothing. They simply nodded and returned to their homes. Elena walked home with Mia's hand in hers, her face calm, her mind working quietly behind her eyes. 3 days later, everything changed. It happened during a routine inspection at the colony school. Zarathi soldiers arrived without warning, saying they needed to check the building for unauthorized communication devices. The teachers were told to gather in the hallway while soldiers searched the classrooms. Elena stood with the other teachers, watching nervously as soldiers moved through the building. Then Commander Threll arrived personally. He walked into the hallway and looked at the group of children lined up against the wall. His eyes moved slowly across their faces. "There have been reports," he said, "of encrypted signals sent from this colony to outside ships. Until we determine the source, we will be taking several children into protective custody. This is standard procedure under Section 12 of the treaty." The teachers gasped. Parents who had gathered outside began shouting in protest. Samuel Ortiz pushed through the crowd, trying to argue with the commander, reminding him that Section 12 only applied to adults suspected of direct involvement in hostile activity, not children. Commander Threll ignored him. He pointed to 5 children, including Mia. Elena's whole body went cold. She stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. "She is 7 years old," Elena said. "She has nothing to do with any signals." "Then she has nothing to fear," Threll replied coldly. "This is temporary. Once our investigation is complete, the children will be returned." 2 Zarathi soldiers stepped forward, and gently but firmly took Mia's hand. Mia looked back at her mother, confused and scared. "Mom?" she said softly. Elena wanted to scream. She wanted to run forward and pull her daughter away. But she saw the weapons at the soldiers' sides. She saw the other parents held back by more soldiers near the doors. Fighting now would only get people killed. So instead, Elena knelt down to Mia's eye level. "It's going to be okay," she said gently, though her hands were shaking. "I promise, sweetheart. I will come for you." Mia nodded, tears in her eyes, and was led away with the other children toward a Zarathi shuttle waiting outside. That night, the Colony Council held an emergency meeting. Parents demanded action. Samuel Ortiz tried to calm the room, insisting that the Galactic Council would intervene if they filed a formal complaint. "We must follow the process," he said. "Violence will only make things worse." Elena sat in the back of the room, silent. She understood the danger of acting rashly, but she also understood something the Council did not. She understood exactly how Zarathi logistics worked. She knew their patrol schedules. She knew when their communication systems went quiet for maintenance. She knew, better than almost anyone in the colony, how a supply chain could be used not just to move goods, but to move people. After the meeting ended, Elena walked home alone under the stars. She thought about her husband, who had died fighting for a peace that now failed to protect their daughter. She thought about the years she spent as a teacher, trying to leave her old life behind. She thought about the promise she made to Mia only hours ago. Elena opened an old, dust-covered box hidden in her closet. Inside were data chips from her time in the Fleet Reserve, filled with contact codes for old colleagues she had not spoken to in years. She picked up her comm device and began typing a message to a name she had not used in a long time. Daniel Reyes. The message was short. "I need help. They took my daughter." Elena did not know yet exactly what she would do. But she knew this. The Compact believed humans were quiet because they were weak. They believed a peaceful colony meant a harmless one. They had underestimated how deep human patience could run, and how dangerous it could become once that patience finally ran out. As she pressed send on the message, Elena Voss stopped being only a teacher. Somewhere behind her calm eyes, the old officer was waking up again, one careful step at a time. Daniel Reyes read Elena's message twice before he understood what it meant. He had not heard from her in almost 4 years, not since the Fleet Reserve was quietly disbanded after the treaty was signed. Back then, Elena had been the best logistics officer he ever worked with. She could move an entire supply convoy across 3 systems without a single ship being detected. Daniel had been a pilot, one of the few who trusted her numbers completely, because her numbers were always right. He read her message again. "I need help. They took my daughter." Daniel did not hesitate. He sent back a single reply. "Tell me everything." Over the next 2 days, Elena worked carefully, careful not to raise suspicion. She continued teaching her classes as if nothing had changed. She smiled at the other parents. She attended another town meeting where Samuel Ortiz explained that a formal complaint had been filed with the Galactic Council and that a response could take weeks, maybe months. Elena nodded along with everyone else, but inside, she had already decided that waiting for the council was not a plan. It was a hope, and hope alone had never brought a single ship home safely. At night, after Mia's empty room grew too quiet to bear, Elena opened her old data files. She began mapping everything she remembered about Zarathi logistics, cross-checking it with what she had observed during the recent inspections. She noted patrol timings. She noted which checkpoints used automated scanners and which used live guards. She noted the supply shuttles that came and went from the detention facility located on the nearby moon, a place the Zarathi called Threll Station, named after the commander himself. Daniel arrived on Haven's Reach 3 days later, posing as a trader, delivering agricultural equipment. He met Elena at her home after dark, careful to avoid the patrols. He looked older than she remembered, with gray now touching his temples, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "You look tired," he said quietly, sitting across from her at the kitchen table. "I haven't slept since they took her," Elena admitted. Daniel studied the data spread across the table. Star charts, patrol schedules, shift rotations. "This is good work," he said, "but it's not enough. We need eyes inside that station, and we need a way past their scanners without triggering an alert." Elena nodded. "I already thought of that. There's someone else we need." "Who?" "Marcus Holt. Daniel raised an eyebrow. The engineer? I heard he retired after the war, said he wanted nothing to do with ships or weapons ever again. He owes me a favor, Elena said simply. A big one. Marcus Holt lived 2 colonies over, working as a mechanic for local farming equipment. He had once been one of the fleet's best systems engineers, responsible for designing scanner jamming technology used during the war. After the peace treaty, he swore off military work entirely, wanting a quiet life. When Elena's message reached him, explaining what had happened to Mia, his answer came back almost immediately. I'll be there in 2 days, he wrote. Don't do anything until I arrive. While they waited, Elena continued gathering information. She used her position as a teacher to speak with other parents whose children had been taken. She learned that all 5 children were being held together in the same section of Threll Station, a detail that would make a rescue easier. She also learned, through careful conversation with a sympathetic supply worker who delivered food to the station, that the guards rotated shifts every 6 hours, with a short 10-minute gap during shift changes, when new guards took time to review handoff reports before beginning their patrols. That gap was small, but for someone who had spent years mastering the art of moving unnoticed through enemy territory, 10 minutes was enough. Marcus arrived quietly, driving an old cargo transport loaded with farming tools to disguise his real cargo underneath. Small devices he had built himself, designed to jam short-range scanners without triggering alarms. He met Elena and Daniel at Elena's home, and the 3 of them spread the plan across the table late into the night. The station's outer scanners work in a rotating pattern, Marcus explained, pointing at a diagram he had sketched. If I can get close enough with this jammer, I can create a small blind spot, just enough to get a shuttle through undetected. But it only lasts about 15 minutes before their systems recalibrate. That should be enough time, Elena said. If we time it with the shift change. Daniel frowned. Getting close enough to place the jammer is the hard part. Threll Station has patrol drones circling the perimeter. Elena had already thought about this. I'll go in through the front. Both men looked at her, confused. They know me, Elena explained. I'm a mother whose child was taken. If I request a diplomatic visit to check on her daughter's condition, following proper treaty procedure, they can't refuse without violating their own rules. It gives me a reason to be near the station, in person, without suspicion. That's dangerous, Daniel said. If they realize what you're doing. They won't, Elena said calmly, because I'm not going to do anything except ask questions and act like a frightened, powerless mother. That's what they expect from us. That's what they've always expected from us. Marcus nodded slowly. While you're inside keeping their attention, I can plant the jammer near the perimeter fence without being noticed. And I'll handle the extraction, Daniel added. I still have contacts who can get us a fast, quiet transport ship, something that won't show up as a threat on any Zarathi scanner until it's too late to matter. The plan began to take shape, piece by piece, calculated with the same careful precision Elena once used to move entire war fleets undetected. It would not rely on weapons or force. It would rely on timing, patience, and the quiet confidence of people who understood exactly how their enemy thought. 2 days later, Elena filed a formal request for a diplomatic visit to see her daughter, citing colonial rights outlined in the treaty. To her surprise, the request was approved quickly. Commander Threll, confident in his station's security and eager to demonstrate the compact's fairness to council observers, allowed the visit, believing it would prove that the Zarathi treated their detainees humanely. He had no idea that behind Elena's calm, grieving expression, a plan was already moving into motion. On the morning of the visit, Elena dressed carefully in simple, unremarkable clothing, nothing that would draw attention. She kissed a photo of Mia before leaving her home, tucking it into her pocket. Daniel prepared the transport ship at a hidden airstrip outside the colony, while Marcus made his way toward the station's perimeter fence under the cover of a supply delivery route. As Elena boarded the small transport shuttle that would take her to Threll Station, her heart pounded, but her hands remained steady. She thought of her husband, who once told her that the best soldiers were not always the loudest ones. Sometimes, he said, the deadliest weapon was patience, disguised as weakness. Elena intended to prove him right. The shuttle doors closed, and Threll Station grew larger through the window ahead, its gray metal walls cold and imposing against the dark sky. Somewhere inside those walls, her daughter was waiting. Elena Voss took a slow breath, steadying herself. The quiet mother the Zarathi believed they understood was about to show them exactly how wrong they were. Threll Station rose out of the gray moonscape like a fortress built from steel and suspicion. Elena stepped off the shuttle, flanked by two Zarathi guards, and looked up at the tall walls surrounding the detention block. The air inside the station smelled sterile, almost too clean, the kind of clean that came from a place with nothing to hide and everything to control. An officer greeted her at the entrance, his posture stiff and formal. "You have 30 minutes with the detainees," he said. "No physical contact beyond standard greetings. No exchange of items. All conversations will be monitored." "I understand," Elena said quietly, keeping her eyes low, her voice small. She had spent years learning how to read a room full of tense officers waiting for orders. Now she used that same skill to appear exactly as harmless as they expected her to be. As she walked through the station's corridors, Elena counted everything without appearing to count anything at all. 6 guards stationed near the main hallway, 3 cameras per corridor, spaced almost exactly 9 meters apart. A single security checkpoint between the visitor area and the detention block, manned by 2 guards who checked identification but did not perform physical searches, likely because Zarathi law strictly forbade compact soldiers from touching civilian visitors without formal cause. That small detail mattered more than anyone in the station realized. She reached the visitor room, a plain space with a table and 2 chairs, separated by a thin, transparent barrier. Moments later, guards brought Mia inside. The little girl's eyes lit up when she saw her mother, and despite the rules, she ran forward and pressed her small hands against the barrier. "Mom," Mia said, her voice breaking. "I'm here," Elena said gently, kneeling down so they were eye level. "I told you I would come, didn't I?" Mia nodded, tears streaming down her face. "When can I come home?" "Soon," Elena said, her voice steady even though her heart ached. "I promise you, soon." For the next several minutes, Elena spoke softly with her daughter, asking about the food, the room she stayed in, whether the other children were safe. Mia answered quietly, describing a small shared room with the other 4 children, guarded but not mistreated. Elena listened carefully, memorizing every detail, including the location Mia described, near a maintenance corridor on the station's lower level. When the guards announced that visiting time had ended, Elena stood slowly, pressing her palm against the barrier one last time. "Be brave," she whispered, "just a little longer." As she was escorted back through the corridors toward the shuttle bay, Elena noted the position of the maintenance corridor Mia had mentioned, cross-referencing it silently with the station blueprints she had memorized before the visit. It matched almost exactly with a weak point in the perimeter fence, one that Marcus had identified as the ideal location for planting his jamming device. Outside the station, hidden in the shadow of a supply truck delivering routine equipment, Marcus worked quickly and quietly. He wore a uniform borrowed from a sympathetic dock worker, blending into the flow of station traffic. Using tools disguised as maintenance equipment, he attached a small device to the base of a perimeter scanner tower, then moved to a second one nearby. Each device was no larger than a fist, designed to activate remotely and create a narrow, temporary blind spot in the scanning grid. Meanwhile, Daniel prepared the extraction ship at a hidden landing strip, roughly 12 minutes flight from the station, a modified transport vessel with engines quiet enough to avoid triggering long-range detection. He ran through the timing again in his head. The shift change would begin at 1800 hours station time. The blind spot would last 15 minutes. Everything depended on precision. Back on the shuttle returning to the colony, Elena sat quietly, staring out at the stars, running the entire plan through her mind one final time. She thought about how the Zarathi had underestimated her from the very beginning, seeing her only as a grieving mother, a symbol of human weakness rather than a former officer, capable of moving entire war fleets without detection. Their arrogance had given her the one advantage she needed most: invisibility. That evening, the 3 of them gathered once more in Elena's home, going over every detail of the extraction plan. "The children are held in a shared room near the lower maintenance corridor," Elena explained, pointing to the station blueprint spread across the table. "That corridor connects directly to an old ventilation shaft used for station cooling systems. It's rarely guarded, because it doesn't lead to any secure area, at least, not officially. But it leads outside the station's main scanning grid," Marcus said, nodding as he studied the diagram. If we can get the children through that shaft during the blind spot window, we avoid the main checkpoints entirely. Daniel frowned, tracing the exit route with his finger. That's still nearly 200 meters of open ground between the shaft exit and where I can land safely, without triggering their perimeter alarms. Then we move fast, Elena said. 15 minutes, Marcus said. That should be enough, if everything goes according to plan. And if it doesn't? Daniel asked quietly. Elena met his eyes. Then we adjust. Like always. The next 2 days were spent finalizing every detail. Elena used her position as a teacher to speak quietly with the other affected families, without revealing the full plan, but preparing them for what might come. She encouraged them to remain calm and cooperative with the compact's inspections, to avoid drawing suspicion while the extraction plan moved forward. She also reached out once more to the sympathetic Zerathi supply worker, who had unknowingly given her crucial information about shift rotations. Through careful, indirect conversation, she confirmed that the guards assigned to the lower maintenance corridor were often the least experienced soldiers, typically new recruits placed in low-risk areas as part of their training. Everything pointed toward the same conclusion. The plan was risky, but possible. On the night before the extraction, Elena sat alone in Mia's empty room, surrounded by the small drawings and toys her daughter had left behind. She picked up a small stuffed animal, a worn gray rabbit Mia had slept with every night since she was a baby, and held it close. She thought again of her husband, of the war they had fought and the peace that followed, a peace built on the assumption that humans had become harmless. She thought of Commander Threll, standing in the town square, declaring that hidden intentions could not be trusted. He had been right, in a way, though not in the way he believed. Humanity had hidden something after the war. Not weapons, not fleets, but the quiet, patient strength of people who understood that real power did not always announce itself with force. Tomorrow, that strength would be tested. Elena barely slept that night. She rose before dawn, dressed in dark, practical clothing, and reviewed the plan one final time with Daniel and Marcus over a quiet breakfast. Marcus double-checked his jamming devices, ensuring they were charged and ready to activate remotely. Daniel ran final diagnostics on the extraction ship, confirming its stealth systems were fully operational. Once the blind spot activates, Marcus reminded them, we have exactly 15 minutes, not 1 second more. Understood, Elena said, her voice calm despite the tension coiling tightly in her chest. As the sun rose over Haven's Reach, the three of them prepared to set their plan into motion, each carrying the weight of what they were about to attempt. Elena checked the small comm device hidden in her sleeve, the one she would use to guide the children safely through the maintenance corridor once the blind spot began. She glanced one last time at the small gray rabbit sitting on her kitchen table, a silent promise waiting to be kept. Tonight, Elena Voss would walk into Threll Station, not as a soldier, not as a symbol of resistance, but simply as a mother determined to bring her child home, carrying with her a level of quiet, calculated fury the Zerathi Compact never once thought to fear. By morning, they would understand exactly how wrong they had been. 1800 hours arrived with the slow, orange fading of the moon's artificial daylight cycle. Inside Threll Station, guards began their shift change, moving through familiar routines that had repeated the same way for months without incident. None of them noticed the small devices attached quietly to the base of 2 perimeter scanner towers, waiting silently for a signal. Elena stood near the edge of the tree line beyond the station's outer fence, dressed in dark clothing, her breathing slow and controlled. Beside her, Marcus knelt with a small remote device in his hand, watching the timer count down on a cracked handheld screen. 60 seconds, he whispered. Elena's comm device buzzed softly in her ear. Daniel's voice came through, steady and calm. Ship is ready. I'm holding position 12 minutes out. Copy, Elena replied quietly. She thought of Mia, somewhere inside those gray walls, waiting without knowing that tonight, everything would change. Elena closed her eyes for a brief moment, steadying the storm building quietly beneath her calm exterior. 10 seconds, Marcus said. The countdown reached 0, and Marcus pressed the small trigger on his device. 2 soft clicks echoed faintly near the perimeter fence as the jamming devices activated, creating a narrow blind spot in the station's scanning grid, invisible to anyone who did not know exactly where to look. We're in the window, Marcus said. 15 minutes, starting now. Elena moved quickly and quietly toward the maintenance access point Mia had unknowingly described days earlier. She used a small cutting tool Daniel had supplied to slice through an old, poorly maintained section of the outer fence, slipping through the gap with practiced precision. Marcus stayed behind, monitoring the jamming signal, ready to alert her if the blind spot shifted or weakened unexpectedly. Inside the station, Elena moved through the shadows of the lower maintenance corridor, exactly as Mia had described. The corridor was dimly lit, filled with humming pipes and quiet mechanical noise that helped mask the sound of her footsteps. She counted the doors as she passed them, just as she had memorized from the station blueprints. Finally, she reached a narrow service door leading to the shared room, where the children were being held. A single young guard stood outside, visibly bored, his attention focused on a small handheld device rather than his surroundings. Just as she had learned from the sympathetic supply worker, the newest recruits were often assigned to this low-risk corridor, exactly the kind of guard unlikely to expect trouble. Elena approached calmly, using the same soft, non-threatening demeanor she had shown during her earlier visit. "Excuse me," she said gently. "I was told I could see my daughter again. There's been an approval given by Commander Threll himself." The young guard looked up, startled and confused. I wasn't informed of any additional visit," he said, glancing nervously toward his communicator. Before he could reach for it, Elena stepped closer, her voice dropping just enough to sound reassuring, rather than alarming. "It's all right," she said. "You can check with the main office if you'd like. I'll wait right here." As the young guard hesitated, unsure whether contacting his superiors would embarrass him for missing an authorized visit, Elena used the brief moment of distraction to glance past him toward the door's control panel. She had studied enough station schematics to recognize the basic override sequence used for low-security maintenance areas. "Actually," she said calmly, "may I just peek through the window, just to see that she's all right? I won't ask for anything else." The guard, eager to avoid further complication, nodded and stepped aside slightly, allowing Elena closer to the door's small viewing window. As she leaned forward, she casually placed her hand near the control panel, quickly entering the override sequence she had memorized. The door unlocked with a quiet click. Before the guard could react, Elena pushed the door open and stepped inside, closing it swiftly behind her. Mia and 4 other children looked up, startled by the sudden intrusion, then filled with relief and disbelief as they recognized Elena standing before them. "Mom?" Mia whispered, rushing forward into her arms. "We don't have much time," Elena said softly but urgently, kneeling to gather the children close. "I need everyone to stay quiet and follow me exactly. Can you do that?" The children, frightened but trusting, nodded silently. Outside the door, the young guard finally reached for his communicator, realizing something was wrong. Elena heard his voice rising in confusion, just as she guided the children toward a small ventilation grate hidden beneath a maintenance bench, exactly where Marcus's information indicated it would be. "Marcus," she whispered urgently into her comm device. "We've been discovered. I need that door sealed." Outside, Marcus quickly adjusted his jamming device, redirecting a portion of its signal to interfere briefly with the door's electronic lock, buying precious seconds. Inside, Elena worked quickly, removing the ventilation grate and guiding the children one by one into the narrow shaft beyond. "Stay close to the walls," she instructed quietly, following the children into the tight space. "We're almost there." Behind them, the young guard's voice grew louder, now joined by the sound of additional footsteps approaching. Alarms had not yet been triggered, but it was only a matter of time. The ventilation shaft led them through a short, cramped passage before opening into a narrow gap between 2 outer walls, precisely the weak point in the perimeter fence Marcus had identified earlier. Elena helped each child through the gap, counting them carefully. 5, she whispered to herself, as the last child, a small boy named Tomas, climbed through beside Mia. "Ship's inbound," Daniel's voice crackled through her comm device. 2 minutes out. Just as the group emerged into the open moonlit field beyond the station, alarms finally began blaring behind them, the station's systems recalibrating faster than anticipated. Bright searchlights swept across the perimeter, and shouting voices echoed from within the walls. "Run!" Elena said urgently, gathering the children close as they sprinted across the open ground toward the tree line where Marcus waited. Behind them, a group of Zerathi soldiers emerged from the station's side entrance, weapons raised, shouting orders to halt. Elena's heart pounded, But she did not slow down, keeping her body positioned protectively between the children and the soldiers behind them. A warning shot cracked through the air, striking the ground just meters away. The children screamed, and Elena pulled them tighter against her, urging them forward without pausing. "Daniel, now!" she shouted into her comm device. Above them, the extraction ship roared into view, descending rapidly with its landing ramp already lowering. Daniel's voice rang out over external speakers. "Get to the ship, now." Elena pushed the children forward, half carrying Tomas, who had stumbled in the panic. Marcus emerged from the tree line, firing a small, non-lethal deterrent device toward the pursuing soldiers, creating a brief cloud of disorienting smoke that slowed their advance just enough. The children scrambled up the ramp into the ship, followed closely by Marcus. Elena turned briefly, glancing back at the chaos behind her, at Threll Station's lights flashing wildly against the dark sky. For a fleeting moment, she felt the full weight of what she had done, the risk, the danger, the fragile peace now shattered behind her. Then she turned and ran up the ramp herself, just as Daniel sealed the doors and lifted off, the ship's engines roaring against the moon's thin atmosphere. Inside the ship, the children huddled together, shaking but safe. Elena knelt among them, pulling Mia close, tears finally breaking free from the calm mask she had worn for days. "You did it," Mia whispered against her shoulder. "You came for me." "I promised, didn't I?" Elena said softly, holding her daughter tightly as the ship climbed higher into the dark sky, leaving Threll Station and its flashing alarms behind. Marcus checked the ship's systems nervously. "We're not in the clear yet," he warned. "They'll have patrol ships scrambling soon." "Then let's not give them a clear shot," Daniel said, adjusting the ship's course, weaving carefully through a series of asteroid fields known for disrupting standard tracking systems. Behind them, Zarathi patrol ships launched in pursuit, their scanners struggling against the ship's stealth systems and the natural interference of the asteroid field. Warning signals flashed across the pursuing ship's displays, but confusion and disorganization slowed their response, buying precious time. As the ship broke free of the asteroid field and entered open space, Daniel guided it toward a hidden jump point Elena had identified weeks earlier, one used occasionally by smugglers and rarely monitored by compact forces. "Jump in 3, 2, 1, Daniel announced. The ship shuddered briefly as it entered a short-range jump, vanishing from the pursuing ship's scanners entirely. Silence filled the cabin as the immediate danger passed. The children, exhausted from fear and adrenaline, slowly began to relax, some drifting into uneasy sleep. Elena remained awake, holding Mia close, watching the stars streak past the viewport. She knew this was far from over. The compact would not simply forget what had happened tonight. Commander Threll would demand answers, perhaps even retaliation. The fragile peace between humanity and the Zarathi compact now stood on uncertain ground. But for the first time in days, Elena allowed herself a small, tired smile. Her daughter was safe. And somewhere far above Threll Station, the Galactic Council would soon learn exactly how far a mother's quiet fury could reach when pushed beyond its limits. News of the escape reached the Galactic Council within 2 days. Commander Threll, furious and embarrassed, filed an urgent report accusing the human colony of Haven's Reach of orchestrating an armed attack on a compact detention facility, violating the terms of their peace treaty. He demanded immediate sanctions against the colony, along with the arrest of those responsible. The report spread quickly across council channels, and for a brief, tense period, war seemed possible once again. Zarathi warships began gathering near human border systems, awaiting orders. Colonists on Haven's Reach watched the sky nervously, wondering if their quiet lives were about to end in fire. But Elena Voss had not acted carelessly. Even in the chaos of the rescue, she had planned for this moment. Before the extraction, she had quietly recorded everything. The illegal seizure of children from the school, the denial of due process under Section 12, the conditions inside Threll Station, and the improper detainment of minors without formal charges. She had gathered testimony from the other affected families, documented timestamps, and preserved communications, proving that the compact had violated its own treaty laws first. When human representatives arrived at the Galactic Council session, called to address Threll's accusations, they did not deny what happened. Instead, they presented Elena's evidence, methodically and calmly, revealing to the full council exactly how the crisis had begun. The council chamber, a massive circular room filled with representatives from dozens of species, fell silent as the evidence played across the central display. Recordings showed Commander Threll ordering the seizure of children without proper cause. Testimonies from colonists described weeks of escalating harassment and unlawful searches. Elena's own detailed report explained, calmly, and without exaggeration, the exact violations of treaty law committed by Threll's forces. A representative from the Valari Assembly, a species known for their strict adherence to interstellar law, spoke first. If these records are accurate, she said, then the compact violated Section 12 before any action was taken by the colony in question. Under council law, unlawful detainment of civilian minors constitutes a serious breach, regardless of subsequent actions taken to recover them. Commander Threll, present via holographic link, attempted to argue that the children's detainment had been a necessary security measure due to suspected encrypted transmissions. When pressed by council investigators to provide evidence of these transmissions, none could be produced. The council's mood shifted quickly. What had begun as an accusation against humanity slowly transformed into an investigation of Threll's own conduct. Days of testimony followed, with human representatives calmly answering every question, never raising their voices, never resorting to threats, always returning to the same simple truth. A mother had gone to rescue her unlawfully detained child, using intelligence and precision rather than violence, and no weapons had been fired, except by Zarathi soldiers during the pursuit. The narrative that had almost sparked another war slowly reversed itself entirely. After nearly 3 weeks of deliberation, the Galactic Council reached its decision. Commander Threll was formally removed from his position, found guilty of violating council-protected rights regarding the treatment of civilian minors. The Compact, eager to avoid further embarrassment, agreed to new treaty amendments proposed by human representatives, explicitly banning the detainment of children under any future security measures and establishing stricter oversight for inspection procedures on human colonies. For the first time since the war ended, the Galactic Council issued a formal statement acknowledging that human colonies had shown remarkable restraint under unlawful pressure, praising the measured and precise response carried out by colony representatives, without naming Elena directly. Most council members still did not fully understand who had planned and executed the rescue, believing it to be a coordinated colonial defense effort rather than the work of a single mother, a retired pilot, and a former engineer. Back on Haven's Reach, life slowly began returning to normal. Zarathi patrols withdrew from the colony entirely, replaced by neutral council observers tasked with ensuring the new treaty amendments were properly followed. Samuel Ortiz, though initially frustrated by Elena's decision to act without council approval, publicly credited her calm leadership for preventing what could have become a much larger conflict. Reporters from several council-aligned news networks attempted to learn more about the rescue, hoping to interview those involved. Elena declined every request. She had no interest in becoming a symbol or a hero. She only wanted her daughter safe and her quiet life back. One evening, several weeks after the council's ruling, Daniel and Marcus visited Elena's home one final time before returning to their separate lives. They sat together in her small kitchen, the same table where they had once spread out station blueprints and patrol schedules, now cleared and ordinary again. "You could have asked for something," Daniel said, smiling faintly. "Recognition. Reinstatement. The council practically owes you both." Elena shook her head, glancing toward the hallway where Mia's laughter echoed softly from her room, where she played with the other rescued children during a small gathering their parents had arranged. "I already got what I wanted," she said simply. Marcus chuckled quietly. "Some things never change. Still the quietest, most dangerous person I've ever worked with." Elena allowed herself a small smile. "I'm just a teacher." "Sure," Daniel said, standing to leave. "Just a teacher who outplanned an entire compact security division." After they left, Elena sat alone for a moment, listening to the sound of children playing down the hall. She thought about Commander Threll's words from months earlier, standing in the town square, warning that peace built on hidden intentions could not be trusted. He had been wrong about one thing. Humanity's peace was not built on hidden threats or secret weapons. It was built on people like her, ordinary people, who carried quiet strength beneath calm exteriors, patient and controlled, until pushed beyond what they could bear. Not soldiers seeking glory, Not warriors seeking conquest, but mothers, teachers, engineers, and pilots, capable of extraordinary things when those they loved were threatened. Word of the incident eventually spread quietly across other Zerathi-controlled sectors, whispered among officers stationed near human colonies. Though never officially confirmed by council records, a quiet warning began circulating among compact forces. Do not assume human colonies are defenseless simply because they carry no visible weapons. Somewhere among them may walk someone like Elena Voss, capable of moving unseen through even the most secure facility, guided not by aggression, but by love fierce enough to become unstoppable when provoked. Months later, life on Haven's Reach had settled into a new, steadier rhythm. Elena continued teaching, watching over Mia and the other children with quiet dedication. Occasionally, she still received cautious messages from old fleet contacts, asking if she might consider returning to active service now that the council viewed her so favorably. Each time, she politely declined. She had already fought her most important battle, not for territory or political power, but for something far simpler and far more important: the safety of her daughter. One quiet evening, as the twin moons of Haven's Reach rose over the horizon, Elena sat on her porch, watching Mia play in the garden with the small gray stuffed rabbit she had once feared she might never see again. The stars above twinkled peacefully, the same stars that had once carried warships and threats, now calm and distant. Mia ran up the porch steps and climbed into her mother's lap, resting her head against her shoulder. "Mom," she said softly, "will they ever come back?" "The soldiers?" Elena wrapped her arms gently around her daughter, watching the stars in comfortable silence for a long moment before answering. "If they do," she said quietly, "they'll remember exactly what happened last time." Mia smiled sleepily, comforted by her mother's calm confidence, unaware of just how true those words really were. Far beyond their quiet colony, across council chambers and compact command centers alike, a new understanding had quietly taken root. Humanity's fury had never truly been contained. It had simply been waiting, patient and unseen, within the hearts of those the galaxy had underestimated the most. And should that fury ever be provoked again, the galaxy now understood, it would not arrive with warships or armies. It might simply arrive as a mother, calm and unarmed, walking quietly through the front door.